And on March 31st, I ran off a list of the 20 largest companies in the world by stock market value. And those names, a good many of which will be familiar to you, but they were led by Apple at slightly over $2 trillion. But what I would like you to do is look at that list for a minute or two, if you want to, and then make an estimate, make your own guess. How many of those companies are going to be on the list 30 years from now? But what would you guess? And think about that yourself. Would you put on 5, 8? Well, whatever it would be. I would now invite you to look at slide 2, or L2, which goes back a little more than 30 years, and look at the top 20 from 1989. And if you look at the top 20 from 1989, there's two things that should grab your interest, at least two. None of the 20 from 30 years ago are on the present list. None. Zero. There were then 6 U.S. companies on the list, and their names are familiar to you. And I would guess that very few of you, when I asked you to play the quiz a few minutes ago, would have put down 0. And I don't think it will be 0. But it is a reminder of what extraordinary things can happen, things that seem obvious to you. Japan had this wonderful bull market for a very long time, so you had a number of Japanese companies on the list. Today there are none. And the United States had the 6, now we have 13. But they aren't the same 6. I would invite you to think about one other thing as you look at this list. 1989 was not the Dark Ages. I mean, we weren't just discovering capitalism or anything else. And people thought they knew a lot about the stock market, and the efficient market theory was in, and it was not a backward time. And if you look, the top company at that time had a market value of $100 billion, $104 billion. So the largest company in the world, title, in just a shade over 30 years, has gone from $100 billion to $2 trillion. At the bottom, the number 20 has gone from $34 billion to something a little over 10 times that. Well, that tells you something about what's happened with equality, which is a hot subject in this country. It tells you a little bit about inflation, but this was not a highly inflationary period as a whole. But it tells you that capitalism has worked incredibly well, especially for the capitalists. And it's a pretty astounding number. Do you think it could be repeated now that 30 years from now that you could take $2 trillion for Apple and multiply any company and come up with 30 times that for the leader? You know, it seems impossible, and maybe it is impossible. But we were just as sure of ourselves as investors and Wall Street was in 1989 as we are today. But the world can change in very, very dramatic ways.